Hello everyone, welcome to this Words in the World tutorial series on PsychoPy3. In this video, I'm going to go over how to make a lexical decision task using PsychoPy3. This video series is aimed at new researchers who are looking to use PsychoPy3 to conduct their research online. So we're going to cover some of the basics. If you have any questions about anything that's brought up in this video, I've included my email at the bottom of the screen over there. Mirroring is complicated. Also, if you have any questions about PsychoPy3 in general that aren't covered in the scope of this video, please feel free to contact me. I'd be more than happy to help you out. All right, so let's have a look at what we're going to cover in part 1. So we'll start out by creating an experiment. Then we want to create the routines and components that are necessary for a lexical decision task. We're then going to load in our condition file, which will include our stimuli. And then we're going to try running the experiment. And hopefully, if everything works, we'll have some data to look at the end. All right, so let's jump over into PsychoPy3. All right, so here I'm in the coder view. If you're new to PsychoPy3 and not comfortable with coding, then you probably will never use this window. So what you'll do is go up to View at the top, and you want to go to Builder View, and that's where we're going to be creating our experiment. So here we go. And going into the Builder View has created this new experiment for me, and it's untitled here. Now, what I want to do is I want to make sure that all of the files that are required for this experiment are all in the same folder, and that folder doesn't move. That's actually pretty key. So I've created an experiment already on my desktop called demo LDT, and I'm just going to call this the same thing, demo LDT. And I'm actually not going to include any spaces in the name of the experiment. There is a really good reason for this. If you include spaces, sometimes it can lead to, when you try and run your experiment online, sometimes it has trouble reading titles that have spaces in it. So it's just it's an important thing to just get used to doing. Just don't include spaces in your name. All right, so I'm going to call it demo LDT, and I'm going to save that. And so now I've got my experiment. It's called demo LDT. And if I go to that folder on my desktop, where did I put it? That's right in the middle. All right, so I only have two things in this folder. So that is my conditions file and my experiment itself. So I'm going to go ahead and open my conditions file. I'll just show you what's going on in there. So here I've just included, I think, just 10 words. And I have all of, this is actually stimuli that I'm going to be using for a future experiment. They're all compound words. So I've just got 5 compound words here. And I've got some other information that will be important for my later analysis. Things like what the constituents are, the word frequency of the entire word, the frequency of the constituents over here. I also have notes on the transparency, the type of part of speech it is, the length. Here I have the Japanese translation because, well, that's part of the experiment, but I don't need to go into that. And then here I have 5 non-words. So that's going to balance out my experiment because obviously in a lexical decision task, we need to have non-words because we're going to be deciding whether things are words or not. All right, so this is the conditions file I'm going to be using. Okay. And another important thing is that I have all of the headers at the top, and I'm going to want to keep track of what these headers are, because that will be important later. Okay, let's go back over into PsychoPy. All right, so in a lexical decision task, it's pretty straightforward. I only need a couple of components. The first thing I want is I want to present a word on the screen, right? So I'm going to go over here to stimuli. And I have all these different kinds of stimuli that I can use. If you're going to be running experiments online, it's important that you check beforehand whether or not these different components are available for online experiments, because some of them aren't. I know that grading stimuli, for example, and noise are not available at the moment. So you want to just double check before well, you waste a lot of time building an experiment that you then can't put online. But for now, text components are definitely available. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, and I'm going to add a text stimuli. All right, so at the very top, I have the name of the stimuli. This is only important if you want to be calling the stimuli later, and that only really comes up when you start adding custom code components. So we can call this whatever we want. Let's just call it stim display, right? Because that's what it's going to be doing. It's going to be displaying our stimuli. So then I can choose at what time this will appear on the screen. And I'm fine with it appearing right at the beginning. There's not going to be anything else happening before that. And now I can choose how long I want it to stay on the screen. So this is right now set to 1 second. I don't want that. I want it to stay on the screen as long as my participant needs to recognize it, which is hopefully not much more than a second. But I'm just going to delete that, and by deleting that number and having nothing here, that's kind of set to infinity. It will just stay there. All right, now I can set the color if I want. White is just fine. Arial is just fine. Here I can set the height of the well, it's really the size. It's the size of the text. So we can maybe fiddle with this a little bit later on, but we'll just leave it at its default setting. And the position is going to be 0, 0, which means it's right in the middle of the screen. All right, so now what this text is going to be my stimuli, right? It's the word that I want the participant to see. And so I can't set this to constant. Constant means it's going to be the same across all of the trials. And that wouldn't be very useful, because I don't want to show them the same word every trial. I want to have a different word every trial. So I'm going to set this to set every repeat. So set every repeat means that every time we go through the loop that we're going to create later, every time that loop repeats, it's going to check for what this stimuli should be. All right, and this is going to set every repeat. Now, if I go back to my conditions file, the name the header on the column where I have all the stimuli that I want to show the participant is called target. So if I go back here, where is it? Here we go. I'm going to put a $sign, and that means that it's kind of referring to an object that's loaded by the experiment. And so I'm just going to put this $sign and then target. So what's going to happen is every time we go through a loop, it's going to select a different row in my conditions file. So let's say that it selects the first row. Then what it's going to do is look for this target. Basically, target will have the value of moonlight when we're going through row 2. And so what's going to happen is that this is going to select moonlight, and it's going to display moonlight on the screen. Now, because I've clicked set every repeat, the next time I go through the loop, the value of target is going to be different. It's going to be equal to one of the other rows in my conditions file. And so that way, it's going to update and show the participant a different stimuli every time, which is great, because that's exactly what I wanted to do. All right, so I'm going to click OK with that. And if I go back here, now I can see there's a little timeline at the top. So, and this blue line goes off the end, showing that it's going to continue going forever. It's going to stay on the screen until I tell it to do something. All right, so that's the first thing. Now we're displaying our words on the screen, which is exactly what we want. And the other thing we want is a way for the participants to indicate whether it's a word or a non-word. We're going to do that with a key press. So if I close stimuli here, what's going on there? I'm going to open up responses, and I'm going to select keyboard. All right, now this comes up. So I can select the name. I'm just going to call this response. I'll call it response. And I want it to come up on the screen right away. So at the very beginning of the trial, and I want it to stick around. Now, I'm just going to skip over to allowed keys. So for this, I'm going to let's use the A and the L key, just because they're nice and spaced out on the keyboard. So I only want, when I add A and L here, basically this means that it's only going to detect when either the key A or the key L is pressed. It doesn't really care what else happens on the keyboard. So if you have someone who accidentally leans on the spacebar, it's not going to do anything. And I want to store, so in this case, it doesn't matter if it's the first or last key or all keys. I don't want to select nothing because that's not going to save any data on this key press. So I'm going to select the first key. It doesn't really matter because there's only going to be one button press or one key press per trial. And I'm not going to be, at least for now, I'm not going to be, I'm going to store all data, whether it's correct or not. This is, well, so discard previous just means that it's not going to save previous responses, which is fine because I don't care about those. And I want to sync the RT with the screen. That just means that we're going to be able to collect reaction time data on that, which is really important. All right, the last aspect here is this force end of routine. So that means that once one of these keys is detected, it's going to end this particular trial. It's going to end this routine, rather. So this is great. That's exactly what I want, because after they've recognized the word and they've indicated whether it's a word or non-word, they're going to press A or L. And once they've done that, I want the trial to end and the next trial to begin. All right, so that's all great. And again, I want the same keys throughout the entire experiment. So that's all good. So there we go. Now we have our two components. We're going to be showing our words on the screen, and we're going to be recording responses based on two different key presses. Awesome. All right, so now I need to include a loop. Well, actually, there's one thing I want to do beforehand. I'm going to add a new routine. So I'm just going to click here. I'm going to click New. I could create a duplicate of trial and put it in here. That's what this is for, but I don't want to do that. So I'm going to click New. I'm going to call this fixation, and I'm going to add this here. Now, the reason to do this outside of this routine is just, well, because it doesn't mess with the clock. If I added my fixation point in this routine here, then it would make all of my response time data kind of 1 second slower than it really is, and that's needlessly confusing for anybody who's going to be looking at my data file that didn't design this experiment themselves. All right, so I'm just going to click on this routine here, and here we have nothing yet, and I want to add a text stimuli. The text stimuli, let's call it fixation point. No, it's not really a point, is it? It's a cross. I'm going to call it fixation cross. That's not really that important. I want it to start from the very beginning of this routine, and I want it to last for 1 second. So I'm going to leave that all the same. This is all perfect. I want it in the middle of the screen, exactly where my stimuli is going to be presented, and I want it to be just a little cross. And I want this to be the same across all trials. I don't need this to be changing. That's perfect. There we go. And there it is. So there's my entire trial structure. And I want to add a loop around it because I want basically these things to happen for every loop in this experiment. So I'm going to insert loop, and I'm going to wrap it around here. So this is just showing which routines I want to include in the loop. Okay. Trials works fine for me. Now here I can select the type of sequence that I want. For my purposes, random is just fine. I mean, I don't need it to be sequential. I'd like to have these trials mixed up. If we look at my conditions file, if I went through this sequentially, well, they would see kind of 5 words in a row followed by 5 non-words in a row. That doesn't seem great. So I'm going to select random. So it's going to randomly select. Nreps, this just means how many times it's going to go through all of my conditions. Now, I'm not doing any kind of like repetition priming or anything in this experiment. I just want them to see each word once. So I'm going to select 1 here. All right. And I won't really go into these right here. So we'll just skip down to conditions. So this is where I select my conditions file, so I can browse, and there it is right there. I just want to double check to make sure that I'm in the right folder. So I'm in my demo LDT folder, and there's my conditions file there. And I'm going to open it. And there we go. I have no issues loading my conditions file. One thing that you want to look out for, this just happened to me earlier today and on numerous other occasions. Imagine that I had a space just after target. If I leave that in there, let's just see if this is going to not work. So if I go now to load conditions, so it's actually the same thing, but it actually has failed to load. Now if I go to, where do I go to look at that? Yeah, so if I go back to this coder window, this is actually one very useful aspect of the coder window. If things go wrong, you can go back and see what really happened. If I look down here, I have this error that's occurred. So I have a value error, and it's telling me I have a value error in my conditions file. It's telling me where that conditions file is, and it's saying that it doesn't like the fact that there's a space after target. So it's saying cannot contain punctuation or spaces in my headers. So if you do have any spaces before or after words in your headers, or if you have headers that have spaces in them, if you look at some of these, like I've just said, like instead of writing like constituent space, one space, cob, word, log, frequency, I've made it all into one word. That's just one thing that PsychoPy needs. Same here, compound type, just using these capitals to indicate how to parse the header. But yeah, so that's one thing that you want to be really careful of, and that can be really frustrating earlier on if you don't know where to look for these errors. So again, it's going to come out in the output on your coder window. You'll be able to see exactly what's going on. And so I'll know, oh yeah, I should go back in here and delete that space. Cool. And the nice thing is that it will tell you exactly where those spaces are so that you can go in and do that. Okay. There we go. Everything looks like it's loaded nicely. Okay, so now I've got my fixation point, I've got my stimulus display, I've got my response, and I've got my loop all set up. So let's give it a try. Let's try and run it and see what happens. So I'm going to click run up here. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to load the first time. There we go. I'm just going to type in my name here, session 1. You can actually, I'll show you in a second how to customize this window here, but let's just go for it and see if it works. All right. So I'm just gonna arbitrarily choose L as my non-word button. There we go, L. Another L. That's a word. That's not a word. Not a word again. Oh, that's definitely a word. Okay. Awesome. All right, so I've gone through all 10 of my loops. Very exciting. And it's giving me a warning about my screen size. That happens all the time. That's actually going to be a crucial error. It's not an error. That's why it says warning. If it says warning, you can kind of, well, just be aware of it. You don't have to ignore it. Everything went smoothly. So let's go back and look at the folder where everything is and see if anything's happened. Oops, not that window. Here we go. And if I look here, so now I have this file that's been created called last run. That's not going to be very important for you to look at, but what is important is that this other folder has been created called data. So if I look into the data file, I can see this Excel file that's been created, and well, it's today's date and roughly, actually exactly the time. So 4:46, that's the time that I completed the experiment on this day, in this year. This is the name of the experiment, and this was the name that I put in at the beginning under the participant information. All right, so if I open this up, we'll have a look at what goodies it's got for me. All right. So here is all the information from my conditions file. The NAs have been converted to none. If I scroll over this way, so this is where I get some important information. So that trial loop that I add in, so that was called trials here. So that's actually recorded which trial it is, right? So trial 0 up to 9 for a total of 10. And then this is indexing which trial which row in the conditions file each of these words was on. So if I remember, Moonlight was at the very top. If I scroll over to Moonlight, it should be 0. That's indicating that, well, this is basically just the order that it selected conditions from the rows from the conditions file. All right, these were my response keys. So this was when I was pressing L for non-words and A for words. And if you remember, what I did in the experiment was called this response. And so all of this data has been generated by this component here. And so this is what keys it was detecting. And remember, the only two options were A or L. And then this is giving me the response RT. So this is how long I took to recognize the word. So you can see I took a really long time for the first one, and then after that I was pretty quick, keeping it more or less under a second. All right. This is showing the frame rate. This is the version of PsychoPy, experiment name, the date of the experiment, and remember, this was the information that I entered at the beginning of the experiment in that window. So that was the participant name that I typed in, and then that session was 1. All right, so that's the kind of data that you can collect. Again, like including all of this information in my conditions file saves me a bit of time, because if I wanted to do a bit of analysis based on frequency data, then I could actually start doing that analysis right away. I wouldn't have to be adding that information in later. So that can save some time. All right. Looks pretty good. So I'm just going to close that. I don't need to save it. And I'm going to make sure that I save my experiment. It saves automatically every time you run it, but it's always good to check. And there we go. That's everything that I aim to cover in part 1. And I guess I will see you back again for part 2, where we're going to look at how to get this experiment online, and then have it start running it online, and how to access the data that it generates from there. All right, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.